Selamat datang. Welcome, everyone. Good morning or good evening, depending on where you are, as this is a discussion that combines 3 different continents. I am Caroline Brende, Director of Goethe-Institut Bandung. On behalf of Goethe-Institut Indonesian, Sasikirana Choreolab and Dance Camp, and Salihara Art Center, and together with my colleagues Dinya and Rangi, as well as Kenny Suryatmaja, the director of Sasikirana, I'd like to thank you for joining us tonight for our online discussion, How Does Art Care for Whom? With Jonya Suryatmurko from Jakarta, who's currently residing in New York City, Sashka Baylor from Freiburg, Germany, and Sara Rivera from Manila in the Philippines. This event tonight takes place in the framework of the exhibition of our project Bodies of Care, which is on view at Salihara Art Space until December 17th. This exhibition, Bodies of Care, shows the result of a 4-month fellowship and hybrid workshop series between choreographers from Indonesia and Germany. Together with Melati Surodarmo and Ole Fram and Thorsten Michalsen from the Media and Performance Art Collective Ligna from Germany, they explore different notions of how care, community, and choreography can be connected. As a result, they have created instructional performances that audiences in different public spaces can participate with and move to individually or as a collective. Our mentors from Ligna and also Melati collaborated for the radio ballet Dissemination Everywhere in 2020. Ligna, the initiator of the project, asked choreographers from around the world, including Melati, to explore the ways in which our societies and bodies have changed in this age of global threats of the COVID-19 pandemic. The participating audience listened via headphones and followed 14 different movement instructions compiled together as a proposal for a different kind of social coexistence. This project inspired Bodies of Care. As the COVID-19 pandemic has changed our culture and gestures of caring about one another, this experimental project critically reviews our understanding and daily practices of care and community. Responses to ever more urgent questions about care, who cares and who does not care for whom, vary in different global contexts. And that's why Bodies of Care offers a space where participants from different countries and continents can reflect and criticize current caring practices and cultures of care. And for this now, especially in Indonesia and Germany, but today also in the US and in the Philippines. Now, Kenny, I would like to invite you to share a bit more about the project and then later on introduce our moderator and our speakers.
Thank you, Carolina. Hello, everyone. Selamat malam, good evening, selamat pagi, good morning, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us in this discussion. So since May, we open an open call for young artists and choreographers because the practice of Sasikirana Choreolab and Dance Camp focuses on development of young choreographers in Indonesia. And as in June until September, we conducted a intensive online workshop. It's fully online with Ligna and Melati Suryodarmo. And we had a artistic development process to create an instructional performance. The final instructional performance was conducted on 25th of September by 10 choreographers who worked in the project, 3 from Germany and 7 from Indonesia. So we had an instructional performance in 10 different local contexts, which was very exciting. And you can see the documentaries in our website, documentary.org. The instructions you can also still access on Norm Radio, our partner in broadcasting the instructions. And in relating to this project, we just opened an exhibition of choreographic object, Bodies of Care, in cooperation with Komunitas Salihara in Jakarta. On 5th of December, we also created a participatory performance where the choreographers met more than 40 people with health protocols, of course, and we practiced all the instructions together there. And today is part of the exhibition where we want to discuss more about the issue of care and how it reflects how the art gives alternatives and different possibilities to develop the issue of care. And it will be live on YouTube. Hi everyone on YouTube. And if you have any questions, you can put it on the chat box. And here also we have all the participants from Bodies of Care, which are Abdul Hadi Sadikin from Bandung, Kurniadi Ilham from Jambi, Indonesia, Densi Lebang from Jakarta and Toraja, Indonesia, Inyoman Krishna Satya Utama from Bali, Indonesia, Ella Mutiara from Sukabumi, Indonesia, Mekratingrum Hapsari from Solo, Indonesia, Imade Yogi Sugiarta from Bali, Indonesia, Eva Bormann from Nuremberg, Germany, Isabella Maria Hersfeld from Berlin, Germany, and Maren Flüger and Yasmina Lamler, a duo also from Berlin, Germany. So I'm gonna hand this over to our moderator who actually comes from Indonesia but now resides in New York. Jonet Suryatmoko is a performance maker, researcher, whose works question the borders between theater and performance art, character and autobiography, as well as their interconnections. Based between Yogyakarta and New York City, he works as director of the Conference of Indonesian Performance and Theater. He's currently working on his research, focusing on embodied knowledge, production, and transmission in performing Indonesian citizenship. He's a PhD candidate in theater and performance program at the Graduate Center, City University of New York, and he's an Asian Cultural Council Graduate Fellow. I welcome you, Jonet, and I'm handing off the screen to you.
Thank you, Kenny. And thank you, Carolina, for the introduction and such a very elaborative opening for the discussion. And good evening, everyone, with those in Indonesia. And we have also speakers here, Sashka Baylor from Berlin. So I assume it's also in the afternoon, maybe in Berlin. And yeah, so I'm here to moderate the discussion. So shortly after this, we will start the discussion after I introduce and read the bio of the speakers. And I'm in New York City right now at 7:30 a.m. in the morning. So it's quite early to me to start the discussion actually, but I hope you all will enjoy the discussion. And I know some of you already watched maybe the documentation of Bodies of Care that online. I saw it 2 days ago and it was amazing. A lot of interesting projects happening. And in relation to that, we have this 2 days discussion, how does art care or for whom? And we have two amazing speakers here, Sara Rivera and Sashka Baylor. I will read Sara bio, and Sara will present first, right? Oh, Sashka will listen first. So I will read the Sashka bio. Sashka Baylor is a curator, researcher, and writer working at the intersection of care, feminism, and social transformation. She is doing her practice-based curatorial PhD at the Zurich University of the Arts and University of Reading, and recently completed her artistic directorship 2019-2020 at the Arthur Buchsbaum Stiftung in northern Germany with a thematic focus on care. In October 2020, the Arthur Buchsbaum Press published Baylor's publication, Curating Care and Corona. Sashka Baylor has worked internationally within the arts, including MoMA PS1, Haus der Kulturen der Welt, and the Ephemerality Center for Arts and Politics. She holds an MA from Parsons School of Design, a BA from Zeppelin University, and is based in southern Germany. So, Sashka, the Zoom is yours.
Thank you. I will share my screen. First of all, thank you, Jonet. Thank you, Kenny. Thank you, Caroline, for having me. I'm very excited to be here today, and I'm very much looking forward to the discussion with Sara and with all the questions that might come up from the participants and in the chat. I was asked to do a small presentation about my practice. I'm working as John had just introduced, as a writer, curator, and researcher at the intersection of curating and the relationship to care. So I will give you a brief overview of the kind of questions and topics, but also methods or strategy that I address in my work. Firstly, I begin this presentation by asking how to talk about a practice that is invisible and that evokes ephemeral, mainly social processes. And in the context of my work, as a curator, I don't have to, but I feel sort of indebted to understanding and possibly troubling the relationship between curating and its origin in the Latin word curare. So curare has many different meanings and dimensions: to take care, to attend to heal, to provide for, and to worry about, and to care about. So it does have this sort of troubling notion to it as well. And in the museum context, the curator, in a traditional understanding, takes care of art collections, of artifacts, of objects. But in my own practice, in my own understanding of it, I'm less concerned with classical art objects, but rather with creating sort of relational networks, platforms for gathering, exchange, conversation, and solidarity. So in this way, I want to make visible or emphasize the essential importance that care has within our societies, despite it being sort of devalued structurally, constantly, that we can see in the ongoing care crisis. And so I understand my approach to curating as a relational practice that serves sort of as a form of care for artistic and socio-political processes. So what does this mean in concrete terms? In 2019 and 20, I was the artistic director of an art institution in northern Germany called M1 Arthur Boskam Stiftung. And here I set my focus on questions around care. And I developed a participatory program for almost 2 years, renegotiating this relationship between curating and care. So here you can see the institution that is rather large, has like 1,000 square meters, and it's situated in a small town of 6,000 inhabitants in a rural area of Germany. And the program departed from the kind of conversations that I had with local caregivers in many different sort of facets and roles, trying to understand what are their needs, what are their questions, and how to address them through a curatorial programming. So one of the first questions or the first formats that I developed was a workshop series called Care for Caregivers. And here I invited a range of artists. There was 6 workshops in total. So I invited 6 different artists or collectives to address one aspect of something in relation to care. So as a caregiver, the question of trust, for example, was put at the center of one of the workshops, the other on self-worth, on recognition, on role expectations in motherhood. So many different sort of facets around care. And so through artistic and rather playful, often performative methods and exercises, the artists addressed these questions with the community. And I will provide one example from this series. I chose a performative example given the context or the focus on choreography and performance of bodies of care. So this workshop that I'll briefly present was directed by Miriam Lefkovitz. She is a dancer and performance artist based in Paris. And the workshop had the title Inside Out and focused on questions of trust and boundaries, which from my sort of curatorial perspective was a key, let's say, issue or topic once you are in a sort of caring relationship with somebody else. And what you can see here is the flyer, sort of the cover of the flyer that was distributed to announce the workshop. And I chose not to sort of announce sort of a big name of an artist that people might not know actually in this rural community, but actually sort of hook the reader or spark an interest by posing a question through which I hoped to connect to the audience. So here the question reads, what are the conditions for mutual trust? And so we usually had around 20 participants of different ages. I think the oldest one was 84 and the youngest 15. And here in this case, we had lots of discursive elements, but also different kind of exercises that involved sort of establishing a kind of trust between the participants. So touch, closed eyes, and really sort of trying to let go. And this was the build up to an exercise that we did in public space, the so-called silent walk. And this is a performance piece that Miriam Lefkovitz has done or staged or practiced with many people around the world. And it's basically walking with closed eyes one person has the eyes closed and the other open, and you are only guided, or you only communicate sort of through the touch of the palms. And this was a quite intense experience for a lot of the participants. Here you see it was raining, so this is a picture taken from inside the institution through the rainy window to participants walking in public space. And it was actually quite interesting to also observe the kind of reactions that people had in the village in regards to this public performance. And it also got me thinking sort of what does it mean to insert this kind of artistic practice into a rural context. And I know that Sara, who is here with us today, also has similar questions and approaches, and I'm very curious to be in exchange with her about this. In the next step, after having sort of briefly given an example of a kind of curatorial format that addresses care as a theme, I want to stress or try to elaborate what it means to actually practice care from the perspective of a curator and to understand care not so much or not only as a theme, but really as a method, as a structure. And the relationship between care and the arts in relationship to sort of artistic labor is actually quite precarious, because especially for women artists with caring responsibilities, there's a lot of discrimination against artists who are mothers. So it's very often sort of the end of a career once a pregnancy is announced. And in this light, it was actually quite important for me to produce a kind of counter, or to set sort of a counter argument against that, and to invite primarily women artists. So the reason why I'm showing this image, it's the cover of a text by the art critic Hetty Judah, and the subtitle reads, "How can you attend your own show's launch party if it clashes with children's bath time?" So this, of course, sounds a little bit funny, but the reality of it is that it is actually extremely difficult to combine an artistic career and the responsibilities as a caretaker. So I try to understand what are the kind of infrastructures that I can institute as a curator of a temporary program that allows for artists with caring responsibilities, but also for participants with caring responsibilities to actually attend, to not have it clash with bath time, so to speak. And as we're talking, that the discussion today is also about how does art care and for whom? And then the question is, of course, always for whom does it not care? And when you look at the statistics of auction prices, of representation in galleries, you can, of course, see a really large contrast between artists who identify as men and as women, and then, of course, an even further discrimination against artists who are parents. So for the workshop series, for example, I only invited women artists, and in the conversation, it actually turned out that all of them in some capacity performed care labor in their private lives. So some were pregnant at the time that our conversation started, and then they arrived to facilitate the workshop with an infant. And so in this context, their caring labor was not seen, or was no reason, let's say, to discriminate against, but rather see it as an expertise that they bring to the table. Another key sort of conceptual element that was part of the curatorial program was that there was always free on-site childcare, both for the participants and the artists. And we also really left it open if people wanted to bring a partner to support with childcare, that this was always possible. So we tried to, create a space of agency or flexibility to address the needs that people might have. Then we always had food, free shared meals as a central element. Of course, this is an element where sort of informal exchange can happen, but it's also a way to nourish and honor the bodies with which we participate. And in some of the workshops, it even formed part of the workshop itself. So for example, Julieta Aranda did a workshop on the question of time in relation to care work. And we prepared the meal for the session collectively. So just to summarize, in the context of my work, I try to focus on questions of care as a topic, but also try to consider and take serious the kind of structures that institutions should, in my opinion, should provide in order to make their programming accessible for a wide range of people. And with this note, I thank you for your attention, and I'm very much looking forward to the conversation with Sara and Jonette. Thank you.
Thank you, Saskia. Thank you, Saskia, for this inspiring and very amazing presentation. I note several important points that really, I hope, really trigger our conversation later. One of it's like, of course, and I really underline it, practicing care as a method. So how you really embrace the care itself, not only as a perspective, but also a practice and a method. So it's really interesting. And before I move to Sara, I mistakenly mentioned that Saskia was from Berlin, but Saskia is from Freiburg. So I'm sorry for this, Saskia.
Thank you.
And so we move to Sara. Sara Rivera is a cultural worker and community organizer living in the Philippines. She is co-convener of Sama-Samang Artista para sa Kiluyang Agrario, Osaka, Artist Alliance for Genuine Land Reform and Rural Development, and an anti-feudal alliance of art and knowledge workers that support and advance the peasants' agenda of genuine agrarian reform, rural development, and food security in the Philippines. Rivera's ongoing research has been focused on examining memory and hegemony towards the imagining of possible futures and ecologies of action. Currently, she is a resident digital fellow of the 21-22 Summer Academy Paul Klee, or SPK, program hosted by the Bern University of the Arts, HKB. And Sara, the Zoom is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for Joned and Saskia for joining me today in this discussion, and Kenny and Carolina for inviting me to this talk. So, is my screen shared? Okay, there. So when Kenny first reached out to me to talk about care, for how to care and for whom, and then we had a talk with Saskia, I went into making this mind map that actually, since making it, has really helped me discover and interrogate my own approach to care and art making in general. So when I say I'm a cultural worker, I first started as a archivist for a startup tech art company. And there I was formally an archivist because it was very corporate. And when I was working there, I immediately uncovered how close remembering and memory was to me, even before being part of the institution. So here you can see that care branches out to how and then for whom. So how to care, remembering primarily is a form of care to me as someone who grew up collecting and as someone who grew up trying to make scrapbooks of memories of your childhood, and this is how I got in touch with my girlhood. So remembering in the very personal level. But slowly I examined remembering as memory, and then eventually as a form of knowledge sharing. And formally, we know that as archiving. So in archiving, this involves historicizing not only conditions, thought, but also work itself. And particularly now when fake news and hyperstition becomes ubiquitous, remembering becomes very urgent. The practice and task of remembering becomes not just urgent, but also something that we need to examine as method and task eventually. So particularly recent times, historical revisionism has been rampant across commercial media and liberal media. It becomes important for us to historicize, to archive, and to share knowledge. Particularly, knowledge sharing also extends into capacity building. So not only do we share knowledge in the form of texts, literature, but or any kind of modality that knowledge takes, but also the capacity for knowledge to equip our own methods and tasks and work. So when we go to the question of care for whom, we immediately go towards thinking of caring for people. But I think, like Saskia mentioned, who are we caring for and who is not being taken care of? There also becomes the question of who is taking care of those whose job is to take care of others. So what I equip my practice with when I think of the question for whom is social investigation and class analysis. I think this is very important when we think of, or when we ask ourselves, do systems care or do they have the capacity to care? So social investigation becomes important because you are not just looking at conditions from an empirical perspective. You are actually examining you are examining the lived experience of the marginalized, and with class analysis, it equips you to further enumerate who to take care of and who needs taking care of. So all of this, remembering and social investigation and class analysis, I apply, and it strikes my organizing as a community organizer. So like Joan had mentioned, I am part of an artist alliance of, I'm a part of an anti-feudal alliance of artists and knowledge workers that campaign for the peasant agenda of genuine agrarian reform, rural development, and food security in the Philippines. So these are the people that I care for. And the caring for the peasants and farmers of the Philippines does not actually come from any sort of moralistic standpoint, rather social responsibility. These are communities in the Philippines that face militarization, face liberalization policies in agriculture, and so on and so forth. And this circles back to caring when the people most ostracized in the communities are people who make food. And what more is food but then the basic or the very primary act of showing care, making food. So here in this mind map, I also listed down, after do systems care, what are the systems in place, especially in my context, in my country. The Philippines to this day remains to be a semi-colonial, semi-feudal country, riddled with feudalism, backwards mode of production. We don't have national industries, imperialism between US and China, and bureaucrat capitalism, where our laws are mostly made to usher more capital, further isolating and alienating communities in the Philippines, and particularly to my interests and to my who I want to care for, the peasant communities in the Philippines, who make up more than 75% of the country. To this day, 9 out of 10 Filipino farmers are landless or do not have enough land to till. And I think this is the good part. This is the part where you would begin to ask, what do cultural workers or artists have to do with peasant communities? Why are we integrating with peasant communities? Why in the first place do we carry that? Because artists and cultural workers, they find themselves in the thick of collective action. More than just anticipating the future, they participate in building a future that empowers everyone, including themselves, to create, experiment, and express the collective ideals of peoples that struggle together. So what artists and farmers actually have in common and is the patronage system that still exists in haciendas and even galleries, institutions, or commercial art institutions in the Philippines. So in this mind map, I linked care of how to discovering possible futures, and then for whom into ecologies of action. So mostly in my practice, I define care as both the working towards possible futures and the discovery of ecologies of actions, opening up democratic spaces where we are able to experiment and be able to make art. So here is a slideshow of some of the actual programs that we've had and I've participated in. So this is a photo from one of the programs we have called Luto Laban. Luto Laban is a solidarity lunch cookout. So luto in Filipino is cook and laban means to fight. Yeah, there are more photos here. So Luto Laban is an integration program that facilitates interaction between peasant advocates and organized farmers and agricultural workers. So this brings volunteers like myself and other peasant advocates to specific sites of struggle, such as here, this is a protest camp. And in the other photos, you will see that we've brought it to picket lines. So Lutu Laban is specifically to exchange stories with farmers and workers to learn about their oppression and be inspired by their resistance. So visitors, us, we go to the site and we bring tools, ingredients for preparing a pre-planned lunch menu. So we cook with the unionists and the agricultural workers that hold protest camps. And this was actually prompted by the bombing of Lumad schools in Mindanao and the displacement of students in 2017. So Lutu Laban has now become a platform for advocates to be in solidarity with the peasant communities across the country. So there are more photos there. Also, here in the Lutu Labans, we also hold workshops for children. So the unionists sometimes bring their children with them when they go to the protest camps, when they evacuate militarized spaces. And we teach children map making and basic drawing, where they are able to they are able to draw their own narratives. They become the authors of their own stories and their own struggles. We also had in one of the Lutu Labans poetry workshop for the unionists themselves. So to give them a space to be able to articulate their own frustrations, their own oppression, and to also find in themselves words of resistance and solidarity. So next. So this is the poetry workshop that we had before. So this is a very good opportunity, not only to know who you are caring for. I think we can stop there. Who you are caring for, but why do we care in the first place? It's very different to just read through people's oppression through books, to watching videos or watching TV. Getting to know them as people breaks the barriers of what solidarity actually means. We are not just thematizing their oppression, but we become one with their campaigns and their agendas. Okay. Next, this photo actually. So my collective Saka also has a project called Bungkalan Learning and Demonstration Project. So Bungkalan Learning, Bungkalan Land for short. So Bungkalan comes from the Filipino word bungkal, which means to till land. So historically, Bungkalan is facilitated by organized farm workers to claim idle land in plantations and haciendas in the Philippines so that they can make their own food because they are not paid enough or are working under slave-like conditions. So the land project locates the artist's pursuit of new forms in the peasant pursuit for new freedom through the assertion of space, through assertion of land sovereignty and food sovereignty. So this platform aims to provide opportunities for sustained interaction between artists, knowledge workers, and advocates with the peasant communities themselves through mass-based and people-oriented educational discussions, community integration activities, and multi-sectoral collaboration. So yeah, I think I would just like to end my presentation by saying that in my practice, there's not actually a lot of making things involved in making art or not writing in writing. Not making and not writing is working, organizing, caring for others, caring for yourself, remolding. Also, you can really start making art. And I think that's the perspective that I always come from. So yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you, Sara. Yeah, this is a very interesting presentation with a lot of similarities with Indonesian context, for example, given we both in Southeast Asian context, with the community in the rural area, and what I can say, semi-feudalistic context of it, and that is really important. I highlight here your note about social and class investigation, that in my opinion, it provides a really radical approach to the practice itself, right? And yeah, I have a lot of questions, but I can hold it for a second. So we have some participants of the project Bodies of Care right here with us right now, and we also have our audience that might join us in different platforms and also in this Zoom. So first of all, I will provide the opportunity for the participants in the project to elaborate Saskia and Sara presentation, or if you have any comment or question, they also welcome. And later on, I will also expand the discussion with the audience. Everyone is okay with that. So to the participant first, is there any comment or question related to, let's say, your own context in Bodies of Care, because you have a very similar perspective to some extent, but also there are particularities with your own practice and your own background, right? So, and how, the subject of the project itself is also different, given some of you work with a community or in the village, or some of you work with, let's say, with the outland taxi driver. So it provides different context with rural or urban, and also different connection with the perspective of the art itself. So yeah, please, if any of you, I see here some of the participants. Is there any? Not yet? Okay. So yeah, they might need more time just to think about it. I have a question actually for Saskia and Sara, and they might be a very simple question, not simple, but it's just a elaborative question about the presentations. So both projects really rely on the care as a artistic practice and also social practice, and most of them, you also elaborate the idea of touching-based performance, right? And also providing foods, which in the context of COVID right now, especially in the beginning of COVID, it was really prohibited, right? So how do you think now with the development of COVID, we should, develop a different approach of that, given the two things that I mentioned earlier is not be longer relevant if the COVID happens again. And no, it might be happening again with the new variant, for example, but it happened during the early time of COVID. Like, we should have a social distance with others, and we should not touch them, or providing food is also complicated. So if you can also elaborate the difference comparison, that will be great. Maybe Saskia first and then Sara.
Thank you. Yeah, in fact, this was a major question that came up sort of at the middle of the sort of temporal curatorial project. And I had already planned, very sort of discursive encounter kind of formats for the rest of my program. And then COVID came along, and it sort of shook up the whole system, and it provided me with this paradox that now care is sort of at the forefront of all the discussions, but my kind of curatorial practice centering on care now is no longer able to be practiced, right. So I felt like I had my hands tight, and I wasn't able to act in a moment where these questions of care became ever more pressing or urgent, and I do not live, or for parts of the time I lived in Hohenlockstedt in this rural community. But when the pandemic happened, I was in the south of Germany, and so really far away. And I felt this huge disconnect and a lot of frustration. And it actually, I don't want to say inspired, but it urged me or pushed me to write a small booklet that you also mentioned, Jonat, in the introduction. And it's called Curating Care. and Corona. It's free online if somebody wants to download it. And there I really try to follow these questions. What does it mean, or is care sort of dependent on bodies and bodily encounters? And if not, so this was really pressing for me in the beginning of the pandemic. But I have to say, I mean, I think we all grew, like the audience grew, and we as cultural producers grew in our experience of how to relate through screens. And I think it was a process. I mean, it took some time also, let's say, to educate people in rural communities who are elderly. It required, to make individual phone calls, to install Zoom, to do tech checks, to sort of bring people, again, to sort of build this infrastructure, the digital infrastructure in that case, on which to continue to meet. It wasn't a given, so to speak. So some of these conversations, we had a storytelling cafe, and that continued online. And now, sort of a year later, I actually went back north again to meet the people of the storytelling cafe in physical presence, because it was possible, of course, with distance and masks and everything. But and I do think there is quite a big difference sort of in the quality of how you can have an assembly and a kind of discourse, and the informality and sort of these aspects of hospitality and welcoming people. They do provide themselves to be very difficult in a digital space. But of course, there's also benefits. I'm a caregiver, I'm a single parent of a small child, and to be constantly traveling for work, like it also, that is an added stress as well, where you think, okay, what are the kind of bodily resources and energies that I can provide for my profession? And then to see, okay, some things are actually easier to be able, in the context of care, also to perform it from home in a digital setting. But yeah, I don't think there is like a one-sided answer to it, but it definitely brings out a lot of tensions and questions.
Yeah, definitely. I need to look. I will look at the book Curating Care and Corona, because, as you said, it provides it explains the paradox. Care and Corona is like, it's such a strange time to us. Just you should take care of others. Well, you even cannot touch them or meet them in person, right? So, and definitely I will also ask the participant about this context, how they develop the project Bodies of Care during the time of Corona, with the issue of care, right? Which is, it's a basic question, but I do think that's a really important question to elaborate. Sara.
Yes. So I think when the pandemic hit, there was a moment where it just felt temporary. And then shortly after that, it became falling back into that wishful thinking, when are we going back to normal? But then the question becomes, normal for whom? Especially since for the already infirm and alienated, normal has never actually been truly kind. So the question shifted to, how do we adapt to this, to how do we struggle within it? Because I think I always go back to just to when Walter Benjamin said that that things just go on as a catastrophe. So especially since I work closely with communities where the digital space isn't an option. It's impossible. It's not even an option. So adapting to it, kind of working around it, became futile almost. So the goal was to struggle within. So it's particularly in my context, because even when people were at home, were in their homes and people weren't allowed to leave, demolitions were still taking place. People were still being kicked out of their homes by corporate land grabbers. Indigenous people were being bombed out of their homes constantly. So the terror outside did not stop. So then the question became, then we should go out. And my good friend Ali Cabral says that social distancing, we must hold on to it as much as social solidarity. So our programs actually continued outside, face-to-face, outdoors, because it became imperative that connecting to people, showing solidarity in person was irreplaceable to these communities, especially when state forces were physically outside. So I think contrary to the question of how do we adapt to it, we had no choice but to struggle with it. And I think especially in my context, even resistance is also care. So it became important to point out why mass protests persist despite the risk of infection, not only in the Philippines, even in Thailand or other countries where there's a pandemic going on, the people are out in the streets. And I think in my research, it became apparent that the reality for people abandoned by governments and bone-tired by corporations is that the violence of what was normal in that moment kind of outweighed the danger of not going outside and showing solidarity. So the shift did not come from the thinking. The thinking was the same. The grit and determination to resist was the same. It was just what protocols do we have in place so that we don't harm each other, So it becomes kind of like, this is being together is a garden we tend together, we work on together, and we can't just stay at home, I suppose.
Yeah. What protocols? And that's basically the only way that we, can adhere to negotiate with the situation. At the same time, especially with the issue of care, right? The protocols. And I know some people really try to navigate their own move in the art practice by using the protocols as a method to do the same approach as well with different alteration, adaptation, just to but also really to continue their practice to meet in person with other people, maybe in small amount of participant or something like that, which is great. So yeah, we have some project about that happenings maybe around the world as well. So it's important. I go back to the participants if they have any questions. If not, I think we have Torsten Mikkelsen here from Ligna, who was the mentor of the project. And I would like to hear your comment and thought about this shift between pre-corona and during the corona time. I know everyone here is overwhelmed talking about the corona and the pandemic, but I just also want to provide a basic understanding among different contexts, whether it's in the Philippines or in Indonesia or in Germany, for example, or in other place in the world, and how we navigate this, the shift of this period, especially in terms of issue of care, which is, as I said previously, it's kind of paradox, and this is the most interesting part to me. Thorsten, would you like to say something about this?
Yeah, thank you. But first, if one of the participants maybe wants to say something first, so of the participants of the workshop or of the whole working process of bodies of care, I can certainly also step back for a few more minutes, or maybe we do it the other way around. However, first, thank you very much that I can also talk here, and thank you very much for this inspiring lectures that you gave. And so what just came into my mind now was that our impulse was, and this is something maybe we could discuss, because I don't want to say, I'm now even more maybe a little bit putting it into question, hearing what you, Sara, and Saskia now said. Our impulse was, or also political impulse towards the pandemic was maybe a little bit the opposite, turning from our immediate context more to the further away. And the idea behind it was that we realized that here in Germany, we found that everybody, when this pandemic started, was very much concerned with themselves. And with what kind of restrictions the means meant to them, and how much, so to speak, one was suffering, which was certainly right for many people working in the social sector, people working delivering parcels and whatever. But we thought, okay, isn't it the right moment to broaden the view and to think and to see how this catastrophe hits other people somewhere else, and also to take to broaden the view also of people here to this and to the international to the international perspective of the whole situation. And this was why we first started this piece, Dissemination Everywhere, where we really wanted to have perspectives that were alien to us. And I think also with this idea of, okay, we have, as Sara said, a kind of catastrophic condition of the world in which we here in Germany always are in a very privileged position. And shouldn't we take this this situation now with the pandemic not as as one of the starting points to put into question this catastrophic situation in general? And so this was why we really a little bit maybe inverse the view on the whole thing, and asked people from many different parts of the world, among them Milati, who we got to know in this collaboration to make performances, which then again would be we wanted to confront people here with. So the idea was to take voices from not all over the world certainly, but from many different areas of the world, and then also make a shape an encounter or an experience out of this, which then people could be confronted with here as well. And so I think this might be an interesting starting point. And also this idea, I guess, was also a little bit then inspiring the whole collaboration of Bodies of Care, which was then again very touching and interesting experience for us, because I think we also as mentors learned much more than we could teach. So we learned a lot about the different situations of the interesting, extremely interesting context of which the different collaborators of this piece were working with. And so also this very broad working context, working process of Bodies of Care, which was much broader and much more detailed than we could do it in the working process of Dissemination Everywhere, I think made it also possible for us to learn much more from the participants, and to maybe, hopefully invert this direction of somebody teaches something. We maybe gave an impulse, but then we received a lot from all the other people. And so for us, I have to say, to sum this up, the situation of the pandemic was very much a situation of finding different ways of connection. But I certainly have to take into account also what Sara said. This certainly leaves people out, and who are not connected to this realm of the cybersphere, or however you might call it. So certainly in Bodies of Care, the idea was that the work with communities would open the project also into this direction. But still, if we are making project like this, we are still always very much concentrated to people who are in a way connected to all of this.
Yeah. Thank you, Thorsten. Yeah, it's really interesting because you mentioned about going out, and I remember it was not until maybe, if I'm not mistaken, let's say 2 or 3 months during the lockdown, we even could not leave our place, right? Because we still not sure how this pandemic actually contagious in that kind of, whether it's in the airborne, so how you should put your mask. So people prefer to stay at home. They just go out for grocery, not for anything else. So it was not until 2 or 3 months after that people realized, okay, and the research really provides, perspective, a new perspective, how to understand the COVID, not through the airborne or touching base or different things. And then people can really navigate their own body in the public space as well. But before that, it's really difficult. So going out, I really underline it as very, important momentum in the time of Corona as well, in terms of this bodies of care project or caring in an artistic project in general. And I also noticed that it's actually a really interesting perspective to see, let's say, with the title of the discussion, how does art care for whom, assuming there's a subject and object, right, which actually taking care, as I assume all speakers here will be, with me, that actually is a reciprocal relationship when the caregiver and also the one who receives the care is actually really, transferring the energy to each other. And we have a very interesting question in terms of that from YouTube. And thank you for this question from Ari Adipurwa Wijana. So I just read loud the question. Thank you for such eye-opening presentations. My question is whether you think that the caring-cared relationship between the caregiver and the cared create also an asymmetrical relationship, assuming that caregiver has more agency and authority than they cared. If so, how do you address this in your curating for Saskia or organizing in Sara activities? Thank you. Yeah. The presentation indeed the eye-opening, and also this question is really provocative and inspiring. So I would love to hear more from Saskia and Sara, and later on also from participants if they want to elaborate the discussion. Please, Saskia and Sara.
Do you want to say something, Sara?
I think I agree with Jonathan when he says that caring and being cared for isn't, I don't find it a permanent position to be the one caring and being cared for, because their changes will arise or conditions will change where you will be the one, if you're the caregiver now, who's taking care of you, And what's provocative is the people who are taking care of caregivers become invisible. When in fact, maybe these are people that remain nameless or out of our social contract, but definitely these people do exist. And maybe we haven't given them enough space for us to recognize that they do exist. Because I think this puts care as a transactional thing, where it's I care for you and I'm being cared for, where maybe care doesn't operate like a transaction. Maybe it's more visceral or less I can't find a word for it, but like seeps into, traverses all of our relationships. Maybe it's just in different levels or looks differently. So yeah, I think the question of assuming caregiver has more agency and authority, I think this is still within what we think of care as, say, nurses, mothers, or the very in what care still looks like at least in a conservative sense. But there are many different forms of care where it's less transactional as what we are meant to think or made to think. I think.
Yeah.
What do you think, Saskia?
Yeah, I'm fully with you. The question and also what you say now, it reminds me of the work of Joan Troncho, who's a care ethics scholar, and she writes about sort of different notions of care. One of them is caregiving, and she says that actually part of this is care receiving, and that for her, these ethics of care act like as a democratic principle of a society, and part of that is acknowledging that we're all care receivers, throughout our lives in different capacities. So we're always in this sort of interdependency, exactly, where it's not sort of a unidirectional thing many times, but sort of a complex field where we might receive care from someone, give care to somebody else, and so on. There was actually one workshop that we did as part of the series Care for Caregivers by Manuela Zechner, and she facilitated a care mapping where we put ourselves in the center, and she asked us to map sort of from whom do we receive care and where do we give care, sort of with different arrows. And it was this complex map with different colors. And there were institutions part of it. You could put pets, you could put, family, co-workers. Right. And so when you think of it like that, you really see sort of how rich and manifold caring relations can be. So that would be sort of the one part of the question. But then I'm also interested in exploring exactly this question of care, control, and agency, maybe, because especially in a curatorial context, the relationship between care and control is very close, or you have always this sort of ambivalent space where, yes, as a curator, you do assume a kind of authority, a kind of control over budgets, over resources, over people, and also with the concept of sort of hospitality. It's still, with hospitality also comes questions of discrimination, because if you provide a platform for people to meet, who do you exclude from that narrative or from that kind of sort of hospitality gesture, So I think as a curator, you're never sort of free of these questions of power, of control. But something that, and I'm not saying, I'm a saint that, these questions of power or control do not concern me, but I try to think of the questions of agency. And this is also something that I heard a lot in Sara's talk when you talk about ecologies of agency. So in a sense, I think considering agency as a central part of one's practice is really important, because it sort of limits your own element of power and control and gives space for the others to provide or to articulate what kind of needs you might have, what kind of where you want to shift things. So in a concrete example, one of the facilitators of a workshop, I met her 2 years later again, and she was like, what I really like to think back to is when you said, in terms of childcare, you can bring your kid, you can bring your partner, you can, I gave her many options, and she said that space of agency is oftentimes lacking in sort of cultural production and communication with institutions, and that she really appreciated that she felt she had the agency to do what served her and her family's needs best in that context. And I really hear this also with a lot what Sara says. So maybe to sort of put agency and control or authority in conjunction, and sort of how this has to be negotiated within each project.
Thank you, Saskia and Sara, for the sharp and really, to me, it's really interesting perspective to discuss about this, what can I say, this maybe power gap or agency gap between the two poles of this caregiving. And to me, it's also important to acknowledge, I wrote it here. Sara previously mentioned, it's really a good word that I put note here, to become one with the agenda. So this is also something that I really want to underline in this context, not only by acknowledging that you have agency and meaning it also have controls from the context and the project itself, but also how you navigate that by, as Saskia mentioned just now, by limited your element, meaning to give more people more space. And back to bodies of care, actually, I would like to, see our last point as evaluation and critical point of view to really examine the participants' work. And I would like to ask maybe one of the participants to really use this perspective, if you will, to examine how you practice it and how you navigate your agency with the context of the project, which is, it's really critical. And as you know, it's really complicated. And, it implies paradox that maybe it's really difficult, to negotiate in the project. So I have here Densil, where is Densil? Ejil and also Hadi, maybe to share their opinion and their reflection on the project that they presenting now in Salihara, for example. Hadi, you want to start first, and then we can go to Ejil. I saw Densil here, but no, I cannot see. Okay, Hadi would like to respond this conversation with your own perspective, examining your own project, for example, how you navigate your own agency in the context of your project.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me just fine right now?
Yes.
Because I'm having a little bit of internet trouble, internet connections. There's a little bit trouble in my office. Okay, so thank you for the opportunity given, and I will try to represent the perspective as the participant and choreographer. And when it comes to the recent question, which was just given about the agency, of course, along the process, we are trying to evaluate that. We are trying to examine who gives and who receives, or who cares and who is being taken care of. But at the end of the day, it really comes to the obligation that we need to adapt with what we have. So in my own activation in Bandung, I'm actually given this beautiful space, a very secluded and very facilitating dance studio space. And we have like 3 different floors given to the participants. And about the decision process, about who are the participants who will be involved in here. I'm just taking it easy by contacting my dance friends, which happens to be on the same program on the Sunday. So we have the activation on Saturday, and then we have also a dance showcase on Sunday. So because we have been together in that last few days, and we have been going through a series of antigen tests, and we make sure that each other is safe. So okay, I'm just gonna take 12 of the dance participants, which I know that they will capable physically and emotionally, and they have an interest to involve in the program. So what I'm trying to implement in my own practice is that I do not want to let a question and evaluation to paralyze me from taking some action. At the end of the day, we want to share this as much as possible to the people. And I do think this is very much needed, this action of care, this bodies of care. And I want to, if I may, I want to readdress to what Sara said, that we have no choice but to struggle with it. And not only that we need to struggle with it, but we will move along with it if it is necessary. So even the dancer in my own community, because we have been missing so much the dance scenes, we do not care if we want to use the mask for the next 4 hours of practice until we can until we sweat, and it is kind of like tiring to involve in the process of wearing the mask, but we are going to do it anyway because it already internalized so much, and we certainly need every bit of opportunity to tend and to care and to really being grounded for ourselves and for other people as well. So yeah, that's my own perspective by involved in the process of body self-care.
Yeah, thank you. Interesting response from Hadi. And it's important to really underline action, because in the end of the day, that's what you need to do to respond to this limitation. And I would, we have Densil here and also Ilham participants, and also Krishna here, and also Ella and Mika. So if you have any response towards that question or different point of view that you want to share, please turn your camera on and your mic on. Ilham or Echil? No, while we're waiting for them, I also would like to encourage audience from whatever platform that you're following this conversation to elaborate and have a question. If you raise your question, if you have any for the discussion, and or just your opinion if you have already watched the project that's been provided and streamed through different platforms. Ilham, I see you turn your camera on. I assume you would like to respond. And thank you for that. Please, the Zoom is yours, Ilham.
Can I speak bahasa?
Sorry. Yes. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Sorry, I can speak bahasa. Di project Bodies of Care, saya mengangkat konteksnya lebih kepada ekologi. Bagaimana masyarakat dengan ekologi, yaitu di Sungai Batanghari. Ditranslate dulu ya, Mas ya?
Boleh. So you just mentioned that his work based on the context of ecology, and it's on Sungai Batanghari, which is in Sumatra, where he come from.
Mengajak masyarakat dan partisipan mengundang dan aktivasi langsung di Sungai Batanghari untuk kembali dengan Batanghari dan mengingat kembali memori-memori tentang Batanghari, tentang eksploitasi yang terjadi di Sungai Batanghari.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So this is why it's interesting to translate, because at the same time, I really connect with Sara. So the project invite all participants to be in the river and to recall their memories about the river.
Ya. Di dalam project Bodies of Care, saya menggali lagi tentang bagaimana eksploitasi yang terjadi di Sungai Batanghari yang berdampak dengan masyarakat Sungai Batanghari. Saya mengajak kembali bagaimana masyarakat dan semua orang yang mendengarkan instruksi untuk kembali lagi ke sungai, ke alam, atau kembali peduli lagi ke lingkungan sekitar.
Okay, so these people will really, so they try to recall their memories, how the ecology has been impacted by the exploitation. And they try to invite all participants to be in the site to recall the memories and to what is the last point? Yeah, to perceive again the experience of Batanghari. And I wrote the name of the river just in case you want to Google it. Sungai Batanghari. Ilham, please continue.
Ya, petunjukan by instruksi yang kita bangun memberi respon kepada membangun kembali kesadaran dari respon dari para partisipan, membangun kembali kesadaran mereka terhadap lingkungan sekitar, di mana sebelum pandemi sebenarnya kepedulian sudah mulai berkurang juga, tapi sekarang kita mencoba mengajak kembali partisipan untuk kembali lagi mempedulikan alam, kembali lagi melihat sungai khususnya bahwa sungai dan semuanya adalah pusat dari kehidupan kita semua. Mungkin itu aja Mas perspektif dari saya.
Oh ya, oke, menarik. Terima kasih Ilham. So I just want to translate the last point. So in the project, he provided the instruction performance in which he invited all the participants to rebuild the awareness on the environment on the river. As he believed, actually, even before COVID, the awareness is already there, and they just want to, encourage people to really re-express again and to rebuild the awareness because they believe as the river is the center of the life in the community. So that's the project, and that's what he wants to respond. I will go back to Sara and Saskia for a moment just to respond also if they have a comment with the bodies of care. But we see the other participants here. Ogi, also Echil. They turn the camera on. So I assume Echil, you want to respond?
Halo Mas, halo Saskia, hello Sara. Saya Denzel, can I do with bahasa?
Ya, silakan. Wah, oke, ya silakan.
Jadi sebenarnya pas sesi Saskia, sebenarnya dari awal program ini sih ada pertanyaan besar. Ada pertanyaan besar saya ketika it comes to the instructional performance. So ketika berkata, ketika diksinya instruksi, berarti ada yang memberi instruksi dan ada yang melakukan instruksi. So the question is about power relationship in the performances. Because karena ketika kita memberi instruksi, artinya kita sebagai yang mempunyai power. Yeah. Dan kata instruksi itu sebenarnya saya bukan community person. Jadi saya ketika disuruh memilih komunitas, saya memilih ojol di sini karena saya user, bukan bagian dari komunitas itu, tapi saya pengguna dan yang suka memberi instruksi pada mereka. Artinya artinya order-order yang saya berikan adalah instruksi.
Ya.
Jadi Jadi ketika ada highlight ini outputnya instructional performance, saya melihat community yang dekat dengan saya yang sering saya beri instruksi.
Oke. Ecil, aku terjemahkan dulu ya, karena aku nggak kelewatkan banyak sekali poin yang menurutku menarik dan provokatif dari ucapanmu, dari komentarmu. So everyone, so I just want to briefly summarize. This is a really interesting question, come from Denzel project. So in the beginning, because it's an instructional performance, meaning the artist needs to provide instruction. It means someone will give instruction and the other one will receive the instruction. And it implies power relation, definitely. That's what he assumed. And that's what he thinks about the project. And because she's not really familiar with the community project, she chose to work with the online taxi driver, motor taxi, a bike taxi driver. It's called ojol. And that's basically what she usually does. She gives instruction to them. And that's what she wants to do in the project. And at the same time, she realized that this also implies a power relations. So that's her own reflection on her own practice, which is really great. Thank you so much, Ezil. Yeah, and
I have. Oh, she's gone. Okay.
So, Saskia, okay, please. You have question.
This question, and I think Denzel was the one who also brought it up in the workshop, right? Because I was giving a workshop as part of the Bodies of Care, and so this question really, became dominant as choreographers, as performers. Also, what not only as curators, but what kind of sort of power or control do we have over others when we talk about participation, right? So I think it's really great to see sort of how this is reflected in the practice and to consider, okay, sort of this contradiction between, oh, I want to be participatory, but actually the instruction pieces limit, and here we go again with the agency, they limit the agency of the participant in a certain way because I'm telling them what to do. So I think it's really great to reflect, to play around with different parameters and to see, where does care sort of fit in the equation in these setups. So I think it's really great, Denzil, for bringing this up as part of the discussion and for making it central in your project.
Oh yeah, this is great response. We play with different parameter. That's something that really sharp responding this question. I know it needs more elaboration, and we only have 4 more minutes. If you're right, Kenny. But I don't think we want to finish it in 4 minutes, given it's more interesting right now. So if we have, if we can have like another 10 minutes, if everyone okay with that, just to have a smooth landing of the discussion and maybe smooth conclusion before we close the discussion. So I know there are some participants that would like to also respond, but Sara first, you want to respond one of the questions, and then I go to Ogi after this. Sara, please.
I really want to go back to the question of having instructions as control or power, because it's interesting, because the opposite of that is what does it look like when there are no laws to follow or like rules to follow, So I that's very interesting and a good point to now ask, where does discipline fit in terms of care? And I more often than not, we look at discipline as something that restricts us, but also there's this sort of discipline that evokes optimism, as in especially in political revolutionary spaces, you cannot operate out of whim without instruction, because it is showing care for other people that you practice discipline within your community. You can't just be careless or reckless. So I think that's the other side of when we think about following instructions. So I really want to go back and research more about what kind of how instruction plays into care. Yeah, so that's not actually answering the question, just more of like what I want to do after this.
I mean, I think it's interesting because in this sense, the instruction also hint back to the protocols and sort of social protocols that we spoke about earlier. And I guess the pandemic is one eternal protocol. So I think that is sort of an interesting loop as well. Right. What happens also when you change a protocol? How does that sort of change the outcome possibly?
Yeah, exactly. That's really interesting, Sara and Sashka. The last thing that you mentioned, how you change the protocol. Let's say how if you reverse the protocol, or in this context with Denzil, for example, how if you reverse the instruction, that the taxi driver is actually the one who give instruction, right? So that's how we intervene the public space and how we intervene the existing protocol. That's the first. The second, do we need to reevaluate the name of the practice itself as an instruction performance, given that will imply different, power relation, and at the same time, it will underline the existing power relation in the project itself. Or let's say we have a different nomenclature or name for that, let's say task-based performance, meaning the task can be developed collaboratively between two subjects, for example. So it's just a thought to elaborate what Denzil just mentioned here, which is really interesting. And we can go back to that, and I hope I can listen more about the evaluation of the project in bodies of care later on. But now we can go to Ogi, because she turned the camera or before. Yeah, Ogi. So is there something that you want to respond in relation to the previous point, or you have another perspective?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I just really grateful that I being part of this project. But it's of course, actually, I have found a lot of how do I say, like, this is kind of political, also provocate, because when I do the activate in the market, traditional market in Bali, I just got the rejection. It's like how do I say, like the rejection from the local police. We are not allowed to doing the instruction there. So I just read about the space in my how do I say, like this kind of superiority that because my work is how do I say, like this kind of sensitive issue, which is transforming community. That that's I mean like that's kind of thing that I really, because body is really a lot of data. I mean, like we are having instruction, we have a lot of instruction. I mean if the body have received a lot of instruction, so we can't do nothing. I mean, like, you know what I mean, that we have a lot of instructions, so body cannot move. I mean, in my documentation, I capture one man that he got provoked from the instruction through the sound, and he want to join, but his body is really become freezing. I mean, like, this is kind of the I read the body with a lot of, or full with the instruction. I think if the body as a computer and we have a lot of data, that body will be blank, something like that. And also I just how to create the safe space in the unsafe space. I mean, that kind of a thing that I found through this project. So yeah, I just really conscious, really curious about how come the instructional performance, the instruction itself become the care, the bodies of care.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, well, this is really provocative and inspiring also, because what I capture from perspective just now is not only about the context of caregiving, but who that finally will be allowed to provide the care. And actually it's not for everyone, even just to provide the care. So there's a limitation, right? Given the protocol also different during the COVID, but also to some extent, we will acknowledge not everyone will be allowed to provide the care in terms of this, normalized standard in the community, that the first, the second body as data and it's freeze during the process, and how it's actually really important to create a safe space for both subjects to perceive the process and the practice. And Sara and Sashka will respond, but there's a question in here that I will also read, so you can also respond at once. Hi, Niskira, I assume so. Oh, I'm sorry if I read the name wrong. Hi, many thanks also for the inspiring session. I'm aware of what I understood as the representational nature of the output. So my question embarks from a genuine curiosity with regards to, as mentioned in the paragraph, the query of how do this practice impact social movement? What's the current finding to this, and how do you measure the success rate on the impact, if any? Yeah, it's a really important evaluation question, if you will. And I would love to give the first to Sashka and Sara first, and maybe there are some participants would like to also respond this question from Niskera. Sashka and Sara, please.
Sara, do you want to go?
Yeah, sure. So I'm not sure if I understood the first question right, but with regards to who is allowed to care, did I get that right?
Yeah.
I think during the COVID well, it's still happening. Well, during the COVID pandemic, care has been talked about very conservatively, that it falls into individual responsibility instead of cooperative care. And this goes back to what Saskia and I mentioned earlier, where it's not a unilateral thing. So the position of caring, who is allowed to care, I think it's possible that it can be boundless, that no one, but in line with that, we also have to recognize that care is still often gendered and racialized.
Right.
So positions
And
of
classed.
care are almost, exactly, automatic to brown people or women or people from urban poor communities. So the question of who is allowed to care sometimes goes, more often than not, goes back to who can we pay to care for us?
Yeah, or who is forced to care in a certain
Yes, or who
sense
is
also.
forced to care. Exactly. So yeah, I think that's how I look into that question. This next question, if you don't mind, Saskia, I'll
go ahead.
ask you.
Yes, please.
When we look into how do these practices impact social movement, of course, the maximum or what we want, especially in the Philippines, is of course to rid ourselves of the systems that do not care. Feudalism, imperialism, and bureaucrat capitalism. And what forms do these take is having to organize more people into fighting those systems in place. And how do you measure that success rate? Well, there are small wins and big wins when you're carrying that much kind of shift or paradigm shift or system change. In unions, perhaps it's successful when the workers are regularized or there is a wage hike. And for farmers, it's when they get their land. So the measure of success really meets the maximum of how free and how free a community is able to be. So particularly for social movements, how impacted they are, I think it's quantifiable by how popular these agendas become, especially in the age of fake news or liberal media or other sorts of attacks on these kinds of resistance.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sara. Saskia, please.
I just have a quick note on this question, sort of on the success rate part of the question. And I think this is sort of, I guess, neoliberal logic that very often is asked or quite dominant in the art context, that actually really shapes and maybe sort of deforms kind of artistic processes, because the focus is so much on a sort of end product. And especially with the kind of work, when I say a relational curatorial practice that is ephemeral, that is invisible, what kind of proof, so to speak, do you bring forth, to mark a success? And again, also when observing sort of Sara's activities, it's also very much in the process. So I think it's always difficult and sometimes sort of derailing to focus so much on these questions of measurement of success. And I think or at least that's how I try to approach it in my own practice, that oftentimes we have very intimate settings, maybe maximum 20 people in the room, and you may just be touched by something, by a thought, by a person, and you go home with a certain feeling, an emotion, a reflection, you know, and that may just stay with you, you know, and maybe this is all there is, you know, or it might be the willingness to go back, to be like, you know, let me enroll in the next workshop. So I think sometimes, or the agency also that I see in a lot of these projects is in altering minimal things in your everyday life. You know, we cannot, or I mean, maybe we can. I don't feel that I can influence policies and governance and so on. But how can we see sort of our everyday life as a terrain of sort of social transformation? And so giving critical questions and frameworks for that, I think is the beginning of a kind of change. And it might not be immediate. It might take time for people to reflect on things and to maybe question things in their everyday lives. And I like, for me personally, that's totally valid and that's fine. And it doesn't come with like these immediate outcomes or tangible things. Yeah, I just wanted to share that.
Great, Sara and Sashka. Yeah, that's a very thoughtful response coming from the field. And that's what I love about it, because how we produce the knowledge is really based on what happened, what we have done, and how we interact with this project itself. And I would also like to listen to, you know, more elaborative point from the Bodies of Care project in the future. Next week, maybe, I don't know, but now 9:10 here. So I think we need to wrap up. And oh my God, it's so quick. It's like one hour and a half, not gonna enough to really cover the discussion. But I have some you know, important points that I underline here. And after I read through all of this, I will provide Sashka and Sara to, you know, if you have something to say before we finish the conversation. So from Sashka, I really underline the idea of practice care of method. And in the end of the conversation, we realize how it implies a different complication, because we also understand who will give the instruction, who is allowed to provide care, for example. And as Sashka just now mentioned, it's always gendered also, and Sara also mentioned that gendered and also racialized and also based on class. So it's really complicated, and it's really important to navigate ourselves within this kind of complication. And from Sara, I underlined the idea of two become one with their agenda, because it's really, you know, at the same time acknowledge the different agencies and power between the two poles of care provider and care receiver, but at the same time really try to overcome this gap of power. And in this sense, I really also underline the idea of class and social investigation, because to me it really provides a radical you know, perspective to really shift your understanding in practice about the power relations and also the expressive practice itself. One thing that I underlined that we haven't enough time to talk about, it's actually, and Sashka just really remind me to this point, is talking about the ephemerality of the project and how it's really a fact of the practice itself, how the ephemerality really constitute the notion of care in practice, in your practice, in Sara practice, and also in Bodies of Care. And it will need another session to talk about this ephemerality, which is really important and it's really specific, because it's really performative. It's really performance value that we really believe it has different impact. It's not really immediate impact, but it's also, you know, embodied and affected in the participants in the project, and that's how it's important. So before I finish, I would like to invite Sara and Sashka once again, if you have any final thought.
Sara?
I actually look forward to talking about ephemerality when we get the chance to.
See, right? So, okay, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. But yeah, this has been, I think, care whether we know it or not, with whether it's we deliberately choose to involve or equip our practice, it's actually an inescapable thing, being we are relational beings. And it's always good to find the time to meditate and examine or interrogate our own relationship with giving care and accepting care. So I think this is something though more people should continue talking about, and hopefully we find more questions to ask and more things to trouble ourselves with. But thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Sara. And Saskia, if I would like to also underline, it's important also if you mention about ephemerality, because it's come from your PowerPoint and the provocation.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's another huge topic, but in general, I think it's important because it sort of focuses or forces you to be in the moment, I guess, and to realize that this is that the process is it, right? That you start to sort of value this process as the product rather than sort of waiting for a product at the end of it or something. So it's kind of a change in perspective. And what I take away from the discussion today, or what I really enjoy, is that because I'm writing my dissertation on care, so I'm aware of a million sort of different readings and facets of care, but I think it's really beautiful how it unfolded, like the different dimensions unfolded both in the questions, but also the presentations. And it shifts away from care as a sort of romanticized notion to one that actually contains a lot of troubling elements, but that also shows that if we sort of become conscious of them, we can really sort of shift the frameworks and implement that into our practice. And I think this came through really beautifully. So I'm really grateful for this platform and for the invitation to be here today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sara and Saskia, for your final thought. And actually, as you said, it triggers different conversation. And another huge topic, the ephemerality, given also bodies of care, it's ephemeral at the same time, but also recorded and streamed through different platform online. So it has two different streams and lines that we can also really evaluate and examine. And that's exactly the most interesting part of this conversation of this topic. But I will stop here right now because we just like 17 minutes from the time limits. And thank you for this such really eye-opening and inspiring discussion. I once again would like to thanks to Goethe-Institut, Bandung, and also Sasi Kirana, and also Salihara, who provide the exhibition for us. And yeah, everyone, this is the discussion. This is 8. Stay healthy and have a good one. I give it back to Kenny. Thank you, Kenny.
Thank you, Jonette, Sara, and Saskia. It was really exciting, mind-blowing. And yeah, we need more time to discuss more things. And I would really like to say thank you to all participants and viewers on YouTube, and also the mentors who come to this room. But one thing that I would really like to notice is how we are all trying to negotiate our position in the society on how we want to contribute, I guess, because in this process, we know that the choreographers work differently as they usually do, because they invite the participatory from the public, meaning that they're not only thinking about their physical or personal psychological condition, but also how the public, as the participants of this program, of the instruction, which are probably mostly non-dancers, are also being deeply considered by the participants. So well done, and thank you so much for your hard work, everyone. Yeah, so I would really like to also say thank you to the Goethe-Institut and Komunitas Salihara on behalf of Sasi Kirana, Choreolab, and Dance Camp. We would like to invite you to come and see the exhibition in Salihara. It's open until 17th of December. And please also visit our website on documentary.org, where you can find the stories and the documentation, video documentations of all participants who contributed in Bodies of Care. I'm now giving back to you, Carolina.
I think there's not much to add now, as we run out of time and you mentioned everything. I think what's really important also for me is this offering of spaces and offering of safe spaces that I think all the different practices have in common, and which we also try to do with Bodies of Care as a whole project, and which I think also this space that we opened tonight or this morning showed, as we had so many different voices and had the possibility to share so many different insights. So thank you very much for it. And thank you, John, for the moderation. Thank you, Saskia and Sara. Thank you to all the participants. Thank you to Sasikirana and Salihara. And I wish you have a wonderful day or night, and take care.
I hope this was a meaningful 90 minutes for you all, as it was for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.